Futurama's latest season released recently on Hulu, and for the first time in series history, we got a binge release, all 10 episodes at once. And though it seems like not quite enough people even realize the show has returned, the reaction from fans has been overwhelmingly solid. Lots of people much happier with this batch than the last two, citing a return to more classic sci-fi premises and fewer topical commentary episodes. Now, usually I cover this show with full episode-by-episode breakdowns, but due to the binge release and my workload this year, I've got to cover this latest season a little bit more modestly. So for my season review, I will talk about every episode to a degree, but I'll only be diving super in depth for a few episodes that I really loved. But we will still determine, is this Futurama's best revival season so far? So right off the bat, I'll say that I did think this was a pretty solid season of Futurama. To me, the bar in general felt like it had been raised a little bit. The average floor for this season felt higher than the previous two before it, though I also didn't necessarily feel like the ceiling was all that much higher than the previous two either. I'm still not sure we've gotten a better episode than All the Way Down from that first Hulu season, though my three favorites of the year were very strong. It did feel like this season did a solid job turning a bit further away from the more topical subject matter. Obviously, Futurama has never fully shied away from societal commentary, but often the revivals have felt like they're playing catch up a bit with these different subjects. And save for one single episode this year, I did not feel much of that in the latest season. The season started with the excellently titled Destroy Tall Monsters. I was a big fan of the first act of this thing, mostly because we got a lot of the robot devil. I mean, a little hell bar run by TRD himself. What a great location. I wouldn't even hate it if we saw more of this bar in the future, and in general, I just want as much robot devil as we can get. But this first act largely had nothing to do with the premise. It just created the inciting incident, where Bender learns that he's actually short.
Am I short? No. Oh, wait, short? Yes.
Personally, I am a huge fan of any episode where Bender gets super insecure. Panicky, whiny, crying Bender is probably the funniest version of the character, and he just immediately melts down upon realizing he's kinda short. Love that stuff. The B-plot in this one, however, was a little bit flimsier, with Fry and Leela at odds. Fry thinks they make a good couple because they're similar. Leela thinks they make a good couple because they're different. You know, not a ton there, but I like that this is creating conflict within their relationship and not giving us yet another storyline where they question if they should or shouldn't be together, despite having moved into the full-on relationship era of the show. But also put a pin in that. I do think the way this story resolves is actually pretty fun and satisfying given the rest of the episode's plot. Honestly, on paper, this should be an episode of Futurama that I love. For one, lots of Robot Devil, one of my all-time favorite characters. Two, the Bender is Short story brought in NBA star Victor Wembanyama, and I expect that I am one of the few Futurama fans who exists in that Venn diagram of Futurama and basketball fans. I gotta say, David Cohen revealing this cameo at San Diego Comic-Con to a generally confused audience was very funny.
Victor Wembanyama is going to be in our premiere this year.
I don't know basketball.
That will mean more.
It's a huge basketball crowd here.
But then the episode escalates into full-on kaiju territory, and I am an unabashed Godzilla stan. I have 2 Godzilla posters in my apartment, among other memorabilia. So this episode just hit so many of my buttons in one unexpected package, which was kind of funny in itself. But despite this, it wasn't one of my top-tier favorites this year. The fact that Fry and Leela's flimsier subplot did eventually culminate in the Pacific Rim parody was very satisfying, actually, given that the whole dual pilot thing is a huge plot point in that film. So tying that in with the kaiju stuff, it works great. I also really loved this resolution where the mayor of New York initially thanks the kaiju for stopping Bender, and then flip-flops and thanks Bender for stopping the kaiju. That's great. Overall, I thought this was a solid start to the season, a fun Bender episode with references to an unusual number of my favorite things. The second episode of the season is titled The World is Hot Enough and is Futurama's annual environmentalist episode. They really have done one of these pretty much every season of the entire show, from classics like A Big Piece of Garbage and Crimes of the Hot to the most recent season's Attack of the Clothes. Hell, even Al Gore's climate change documentary An Inconvenient Truth used scenes from Crimes of the Hot to explain global warming. I'd say that The World is Hot Enough probably aligns most closely with Crimes of the Hot in how it approaches real-world climate change info, though the plot is a bit sweatier, for lack of a better term. I like that this episode called back to the established canon in Crimes times of the hot, the fact that they have to drop a giant cube of ice into the ocean every so often to offset climate change. But due to some new data, it's revealed that they've actually gone past the point of no return with the giant ice cube and need a new solution. I loved that this episode brought back the whale/bear biologist, first introduced in 300 Big Boys and now in the Hulu era becoming a semi-recurring character, most recently seen in Children of a Lesser Bog. I mean, this whole character idea is so stupid. A super specified biologist who hates the thing he studies. It's very funny to me. Honestly, keep bringing him back. He rules. He even sprays these baby polar bears in the eyes with Raid spray. This episode actually had a lot of fun callbacks. Dr. Banjo makes another appearance at the emergency climate meeting. Professor and Wormstrom fight over whether to use dimondium or diamondylium, a spat introduced in Beast with a Billion Backs. And their plan to do a fundraising gimmicky song a la We Are the World, which ultimately ends up creating far more waste than it fixes, is a very funny direction to take the story. This episode definitely had a lot of laughs, but I felt like I didn't quite connect to the Fry subplot as he adopts the two polar bear cubs, which kind of loosely ties into why he doesn't help the Planet Express crew later and Leela leaves him to do that. Another episode where Fry and Leela both think each other dies, which happens every season like 3 times now. While there were really funny elements to the Earth trying and failing to solve the climate crisis, it all felt a little bit disparate to me. What I did like was the big reveal at the end, that the data they were operating with in the episode was actually our current climate data, not the data from 3025.
You're saying the people of my time saw this and did nothing?
It's funny, I watched this episode with a few friends, and all of them actually liked this part the least out of anything in the episode, which really surprised me. To me, this was easily the most impactful thing in the entire episode, and felt fitting for Futurama's environmentally focused stories, rug pulling the audience with clear-cut, hard data. Oh well, can't win them all, I guess. Episode 3 was one that I had a much harder time with. 50 Shades of Green. Remember how I praised Destroy Tall Monsters for not giving us another Fry and Leela's relationship in Crisis story? Well, that's because they saved it for this one. This episode was written by Ariel Ladenson, and to her credit, she has written 2 of my favorite episodes of the Hulu revival, I Know What You Did Next Xmas and Attack of the Clothes. So I was definitely optimistic here, but this did not quite land for me. And I think it has less to do with the episode plot and more to do with the fact that I am truly just ready for these kinds of Fry and Leela stories to stop happening. At this point in the show, Fry and Leela are not only dating, they are living together. The show continually throwing a wrench in their relationship and making them question whether they actually should or shouldn't be together feels really overplayed at this point, and I'd just much rather see them overcome struggles within their relationship like we saw in the season premiere. And to its credit, that feels like it's what the episode starts out as. It's initially centered on Fry coordinating a big surprise for their anniversary, a great coupley storyline for them, at least in my opinion, but despite his grand gesture, Leela is frustrated that Fry went to these great lengths for the surprise, but failed to do the one thing she asked him to do, which was water her plant, which of course leads to the potential falling out and Fry's continued insecurity about whether they belong together. There were some details here I did enjoy as a fan. This whole weird matchmaker mirror is filled with Easter eggs for fans of the show. When Fry is scanned, we see Umbriel from the Deep South, his grandma from Roswell That Ends Well, Michelle from the pilot and the Cryonic Woman, one of the Amazonians he has snoo with, the radiator he makes out with in Lesser of Two Evils, Lucy Liu, or presumably the Lucy Liu bot from I Dated a Robot, and Colleen from Beast with a Billion Backs, who was of course played by the late great Brittany Murphy. Basically everyone we've ever seen Fry hook up with in the entire series. When Leela passes it, we see Alcazar from A Bicyclops Built for Two, Lincoln's head, which I thought was a reference to all the president's heads, but Leela is actually dancing with Martin Van Buren in that one, so I'm not really sure why they do Lincoln here. We see Lars, which I loved since Lars has only been mentioned like one single time since Bender's Big Score, which kind of feels insane to me given the gravity of his existence. We also see the mayor's aide from The Why of Fry, Adelaide Atkins from The Cyber House Rules, Zap, her ex Sean, who was mentioned early on and introduced properly in Fry and Leela's Big Fling, and of course the Borax Kid, who she flirted with in How the West Was 101001. There are also these 2 different blue-haired women that I do not remember. Does anyone else remember where they came from? Maybe it's seeding something in the future? her. It's funny that I guess Leela has a specific type when it comes to women. But it of course ends up landing on this new guy, Branch Woodsman, which causes the primary dilemma in the episode, the one I was basically instantly exhausted by. But at this point, I'm a broken record. I've been saying for years that I'm tired of Fry and Leela devolving into a pattern of should we be together questions, so this episode was never gonna be for me. It was kind of funny that it basically turned into like a buddy action movie between Fry and Branch, and that Leela seemingly never really saw Branch as a viable partner, but the episode overall felt a little bit meandering and too back and forth. And for an episode about Leela's ideal partner, it had shockingly little Leela in it, which is an occasional mistake the show has made over the years. To its credit, it has a really sweet ending, and I did enjoy the little mirror gags of everyone's ideal partners in the end. Scruffy and Washbucket, that got me pretty good.
Is wrong, Washbucket. Oh, it would be sweet for a while, but in the back of our minds, we'd know that I'm a man. And your janitorial equipment.
But now we come to one of the season's best episodes, the Numberland Gap. This is one I want to dive into a little bit more thoroughly because it is genuinely a very cool episode of Futurama, one of the super science-y episodes akin to something like Prisoner of Benda. I actually got to talk directly to David X. Cohen earlier in the year, and I specifically asked him about the inspiration for this episode, and he had some really cool things to say. First, talking about that initial inspiration.
The inspiration is straight from Matt Groening himself. Matt had been watching this old Disney cartoon called Donald in Math Magic Land.
And actually, if you look at the intro clip for this episode in the title sequence, it is a shot from Donald in Math Magic Land, fittingly. I actually remember watching Donald in Math Magic Land back in middle school. It's definitely something that has occasionally been used as a learning resource, and so that was Groening's idea and inspiration here. Make something that actually teaches math fundamentals through its narrative. And there are some incredibly cool sequences in Donald in Math Magic Land, but when Cohen and the writers watched it, they had a few issues with its approach.
A, there's almost no math in it, and B, there's not that much animation in it because it keeps cutting. You know, they'll say like, Donald, math is very important to music. And it's like, really? Yes. Let's watch the London Symphony Orchestra for the next 20 minutes. So that's kind of the tone of it.
So basically what ended up happening is that they wanted to take the goal of Donald in Math Magic Land and actually make it function as a learning tool, at least more so than what Disney was capable of.
So then Matt said, well, maybe not that, but can we do a version with real math in it? He just kind of challenged us. I'm kind of interested to see the reaction because I think, it may become like a classroom, usable in the classroom if you look at what's going on in the background.
And to me, this was absolutely what made this episode so interesting and fun to watch. The way it's able to visualize math and get these mathematical concepts across via its animation. Basically, in the middle of this episode, they cross the Numberland Gap through this portal and end up in this world of numbers. Each number is visualized by these 3D cubes matching the number they represent, which allows for sequences like this.
My decimal representation is 5 tens plus 5 ones, but you can call me 5 times 11.
Look, I'm no math whiz or anything, but I thought this was such a smart way to showcase these mathematical concepts through the 3D animation. Every number being made up of these small cubes allows them to group in ways that more or less explain how numbers can be expressed.
Or you can call me 9 plus 10 plus 11 plus 12 plus 13. Or you can call me 6 squared plus 3 squared plus 3 squared plus 1 squared.
I love when Futurama gets really in the weeds with math and science. Obviously, this is a bit different, but I don't think they've had an amazing math-focused episode like this since The Prisoner of Benda, when they developed an actual mathematical proof to ensure that their body switching formula would work. But even in that episode, which is great, the proof itself is more or less background for the real nerds, and it focuses on the fun science of the body switching. This one takes the math and puts it front and center. I really do hope that we see math classrooms attempt to use this episode as a teaching tool, because I feel like it could actually really help. It's pretty sweet. But let's dive into the actual story here, because I quite liked the narrative as well. Initially incited by Bender getting these number transmissions on his AM radio.
It's actually a real thing. Look it up.
And they're right. Number stations are a real thing. And I liked that they used this not only to start off this episode about numbers, but tied it to some of the fun Bender lore we already knew, as he expresses that he's actually pretty scared of most numbers.
Yeah, I love 0 and 1, but 2 and those other guys?
This is a little callback to one of my favorite gags in the entire show. Back in season 2's Ahead in the Polls, Bender has a binary nightmare where he also expresses fear of the number 2.
1s and 0s everywhere. Ugh, and I thought I saw 2.
It was just a dream, Bender. There's no such thing as two.
One of my favorite details in that is if you look really closely at the binary nightmare, you can see the two appear in the bottom right part of the frame. Really good stuff. But this episode's narrative is also explored from the professor's perspective, and I think it takes a really interesting angle. Basically laying out that Farnsworth is far more interested in cold, hard data and information than anything visual. More into the theoretical than the practical. Which was actually something we sort of saw play out in action earlier in the season. In The World Is Hot Enough, the professor showcases this big, boring table of numbers as though it should concern the audience. He sees what the data means and prefers this purely informational table, but the rest of the crowd does not understand it until they turn it into a graph to visualize that data. Not sure if this was meant as an intentional parallel, but I really liked seeing these things play out just a couple episodes apart. They really fit together well. I also loved how Fry's subplot tied to the main story. He's interested in becoming an artist, but as somebody who isn't actually artistic, he uses these paint by numbers systems to paint his pictures. Obviously, this is pretty on theme as there is a direct connection between the numbers/data and the artistic visualization based on those numbers/data. And I particularly loved the reveal that the number station was transmitting its own paint by numbers blueprints for a scientific device, which is how they make it through the Numberland Gap in the first place. Honestly, all of this just tied together in a pretty seamless narrative. I really enjoyed it. And the real crux of the episode ends up being the professor wanting to remain across the Numberland Gap, as it fully represents his adoration of pure data.
A realm of pure theoretical beauty.
But Farnsworth eventually conflicts with the numbers themselves. Now again, I'm not the biggest math whiz, so I'm sure there are mathematical aspects here that make a lot more sense to people who are, but to my understanding, numbers exist as theory for Farnsworth, but across the Numberland Gap, they simply exist. They are practical. So when he brings up concepts like imaginary numbers, it upsets them. When he asks them to prove the theory behind some of their mathematical concepts, they don't understand because in their world, they simply exist. It would be like Bender asking Farnsworth to prove he exists. It was very funny that in order to try and eliminate Farnsworth, numbers attempt to divide him by 0. But once Farnsworth decides he needs to return, after meeting the famed math theorist Georg Cantor, who transmitted the numbers in the first place, they have to send a new transmission for help, which leads to Bender having to confront his numerical fears and enter the Numberland Gap himself. Farnsworth and Cantor have to prove to the numbers that it's impossible for all numbers that exist to be within the Numberland Gap. Now again, I'm not a math guy, but I did think it was pretty cool how Cantor wrote out a visual proof to unambiguously show that there must be numbers that don't exist within the gap.
Therefore, it is not in Numberland, so you are incomplete.
But I really loved that even within this very math-focused story, there was a great focus on character with Farnsworth and Bender in particular, and I was surprisingly touched by Fry's attempt to revert the paint by numbers back to the numbers for Farnsworth's sake, still showing that Farnsworth has grown, of course, by appreciating what numbers can mean.
I don't know which is more beautiful, the idea or the thing itself.
And the fade on the paint by numbers portrait of the characters was just another really great final touch. This one really felt like an inspired episode to me. Futurama has always seemed to operate best when they're crafting satisfying narratives around scientific ideas that they clearly have a passion for. And the more I look at this one, the more I'm impressed by it. It kind of makes me want to collab with like a mathematician to explain all of the mathematical concepts that are in here. So hey, if you're a mathematician who loves the show and likes my content, hit me up. The follow-up to the Numberland Gap was Scared Screenless, written by the great Bill Odenkirk, who I was happy to see return to the writing staff last season after skipping out on the entire Comedy Central era. Now, this episode's primary focus is on screen addiction, with Kif and Amy's kids, Dwight and Cubert, all being incapable of putting down their phones and iPads, which is maybe a bit topical, but the topicality doesn't really bother me quite as much as the way this show really flip-flops on some of its tech lore. It truly feels like every other episode, they're using what feel like modern smartphones, and then they switch back to the classic iPhone as introduced in the Comedy Central era. They showcase both of them in this season, and it flip-flops back and forth. I know this is primarily to focus on that specific trend they want to comment on, but I kind of feel like having the kids all be addicted to the Futurama version of iPhones could have maybe allowed for some more creativity in their addiction and fewer one-to-one parallels to modern day. Though I will say, this did allow for a couple really fun background callbacks. While Dwight is playing 2 games at once and scrolling through Instagram, we can see that on the big TV, he's playing Monkey Fracas Jr., the game that opened the entire series in Space Pilot 3000. And also, a little bit of a deeper cut, on his computer, he's playing World of World War II 3, which Kubert, Fry, and Bender all played in the episode Overclockwise, which is of course one of the 5 episodes ever written as the potential series finale. I think they've done a really great job continuing to throw little background references like this across the Hulu era. I do love that the Kubert/Dwight duo has now incorporated Axel to make them a trio. Dwight's introduction in the late Fox era already created for an interesting new dynamic with Kubert, and they've continued to do a natural job throwing Kif and Amy's kids into the mix here in the Hulu era. And I did think the portrayal of screen addiction looking a whole lot like drug addiction made for some very funny visuals. For a premise that maybe could have felt too set in 2025, it was funny enough that I didn't really mind. This is also the major Zap episode for the season, as the kid trio along with Bender get sent to Scared Screenless to kick that phone addiction, which is run by Zap, though it's anyone's guess why these parents would possibly be willing to put Zap Brannigan in charge of their children. The B story in this episode revolves around what all the parents do when their kids are off at camp, which splits the men and women into 2 groups, having the women get drunk while the men get up to some more dangerous joyriding shenanigans. This maybe felt a bit too spiritually similar to last year's One is Silicon and the Other Gold, which also split the group into men and women, and had the women turn their book club into a drinking club. Just kind of feels like they could do a little more with the women's side of the story than resort to get drunk twice in 2 seasons. But the thing I most want to talk about with this episode, as a longtime Futurama lore whore, is the return of the Waterfall family. If you need a reminder, the Waterfall family saga began in The Problem with Poplars and previously wrapped up in Into the Wild Green Yonder. Basically, when the show needed some type of hippie protester, it was a waterfall. Free Waterfall Jr. protested the eating of poplars, Free Waterfall Sr. tried to save the penguins, Old Man Waterfall protected Zoidberg's free speech when he ate the flag, Frida Waterfall protested the destruction of the Violet Dwarf Star, and then Hutch Waterfall was part of the League of Mad Fellows, who also protected the Violet Dwarf Star in a roundabout way. Every single one of these characters was voiced by Phil Hendry, and the story pretty cleanly wrapped up in the last straight-to-DVD movie, Into the Wild Green Yonder. The ancient encyclopod even preserved Hutch Waterfall's DNA as their human specimen, and that creature was additionally voiced by Phil Hendry, with the writer stating that this was meant to be the way the show continued the lineage of the Waterfall family. It felt like a big epic finale to the Waterfall saga, which was more or less a background bit. So while I do appreciate the continuation of the saga, this time introducing Groomstick and Bliss Waterfall, it does feel like sort of an offshoot after the story was pretty cleanly wrapped up, but it was great to hear Phil Hendry back in the familial roles, and they did write in an explanation at least.
Centuries ago, our mutual ancestors split from Earth because they were like bummed out by science and technology.
It was pretty funny how immediately the kids of this waterfall tribe got hooked on screens once the other kids intervened, and I was pleased to see that they continued the waterfall legacy by having Groomstick get eaten by a monster. And as was the case with most of the waterfall deaths, another waterfall vowed vengeance.
I'll avenge you, Dad.
I think this being so nonchalant because of the screens made it a really worthwhile and funny variation. Overall, I wasn't too connected to the story of this one, but I did appreciate a lot of its parts and had a lot of good laughs, particularly in the first half. And you know, it's always fun when they decide to draw from classic Futurama lore and build out on it. I wonder if we'll see the waterfalls again at this point. Who knows? This was followed up by an episode called Wicked Human that honestly had one of my favorite premises of the entire season, and while it didn't really deliver on the promise of that premise for me, I did think it was a pretty fun episode overall. This one was sort of a spiritual successor to episodes like Godfellas or A Clockwork Origin, where the intention is to showcase the ways that science and faith differ, intersect, and don't necessarily counter each other. This one introduces a rapture-like scenario where humans on Earth are seemingly rising up to heaven, confounding the professor, who obviously refuses to believe any sort of faith-based explanation.
We aren't some cult of belief. We're scientists.
But the fun thing this episode does is that through the professor's obsessive dedication to science, he actually develops a cult-like mentality in regards to their ability to explain the phenomenon, which is a fun subversion, a science cult. It's a really cool premise, and even just on its face, I absolutely love the visual of the people of Earth rising up into the sky. It's ethereal and haunting at the same time, and a hook that genuinely interested me. And a hook really is the right word given the reveal at the end, but we'll get there. But what I really do have to say here is that this this was an episode where the logical side of my brain just could not accept the resolution. Because the moment that those people started rising into the sky and the characters were questioning whether or not they were ascending to heaven, I thought, well, you guys have spaceships, why don't you just fly up and see where these people are landing? I truly was thinking this the entire episode, and so of course, when they finally did do this at the end, it just raised more questions than answers for me. I just did not understand why, while trying to solve this whole mystery, they wouldn't just go observe what's happening with their eyes. They had the capability. And when they did, the answer, while kind of funny, was simply not very satisfying. Turns out the people were getting fish hooked by these invisible alien fishing lines, literally just being fished up. The sort of sky boats on the ocean of clouds was really, really cool visually. I just could not get over the fact that none of the episode should have happened, because following the floating humans into the sky should have been the first thing they did. But my enjoyment of the general premise, particularly its visuals, and the idea of a group of scientists falling into a cult-like mentality made this at least a pretty enjoyable story for me, despite my misgivings with the logic and resolution. And then we come to the one real quote-unquote topical entry this year, Murderoni, which is inspired by the near-decade-old Pizzagate conspiracy of all things. This is the episode I had the hardest time with this year. Honestly, this one had a lot of fun ideas in it, particularly as a longtime fan of the series. Fishy Joe, a rich businessman running a sleazy campaign for public office with an honest, hardworking, small business-owning immigrant attempting to run against him, that's an idea that's got plenty of potential. Particularly fun to bring back the Signoids, introduced in A Leela of Her Own, and of course Fishy Joe from The Problem with Poplars, among other episodes. This episode was written by Cody Ziegler, and I have a hard time pinning this criticism on anyone, because it's honestly something I feel like I myself would be guilty of if I were to write a Futurama episode. But it sometimes feels like Cody's episodes are crammed with too many references and callbacks to older episodes. Like, he clearly has a deep love and knowledge base of the show. His 3 episodes all weave tons of old Futurama characters and jokes into the story at hand, but it feels like it's maybe at the expense of that story. And I think that's largely because I think overly referencing classic episodes actually just makes me think about how great those episodes were on their own, and while it makes me smile to think back on them, it doesn't make me think that this story is doing anything new or better. Like, this new version of the Poplar song to advertise Fishy Joe's here, it's kind of a funny bit, but it's just not nearly as fun as the classic Poplar song, and it just makes me think about how great and fun the classic Poplar song was. Basically, every location in this episode were just locations that we've seen before, and I do love that the Central Bureaucracy was a location. It's a really cool place. I'm glad we went back to it, but I think there's an example of a callback here that actually really didn't work. This is the 3rd time we've been to the Central Bureaucracy, and in the first one, How Hermes Requisitioned His Groove Back, we got this joke.
How long is this gonna take?
I'm still waiting on my birth certificate.
Then, in the second appearance in Lethal Inspection, we got a follow-up to this gag with the same character.
I'd like to request a death certificate.
Sorry, that's building C.
And now, in this episode, we got this 3rd gag from the same character again.
Finally, I can get my birth certificate.
I believe that's us.
And then, immediately after this, the guy dies again. So this joke not only kind of ignores the outcome of the previous gag, but also is more or less just an amalgamation of the first 2 jokes. And it isn't that it's unfunny, it's just that it's sort of derivative, right? I did like that this adventure through the Central Bureaucracy was a father-son adventure for Hermes and Dwight, and that a lot of their conflict here stems from Dwight's justified disinterest in bureaucracy. I like a story about a father trying to connect with his son and sharing his interest with them. That's good stuff. And I do think the new locations within the Central Bureaucracy were interesting. I liked the idea that there's a whole deep dungeon in the depths of this labyrinth that houses all of the paper from before everything was digitized. Even if every other time we've come to the Central Bureaucracy, we've seen lots of paper, including in the scene where they enter the building in this episode. But it's fine. I do think this kind of gets a pass for the rule of cool. Like, the big paper storm, it's neat. And the way the Central Bureaucracy has always been dungeon-like makes this a fun escalation. But the big Pizzagate resolution was what I had a little bit of a bigger issue with here, because it once again just sort of felt like we were cramming a little bit too much together for the sake of a reveal. When they actually do go into the basement of Pizza Bros, it's revealed that it's built on top of Panucci's Pizza, where Fry used to work back in 1999. Not only is is this just a little too convenient for my liking, but it also completely contradicts established lore, and lore from an all-time beloved episode, no less, Jurassic Bark.
They discovered an intact 20th century pizzeria, just like the one I used to work at.
Obviously, the reveal in Jurassic Park was that this pizzeria was Panucci's as well, which is how they found Seymour's fossilized remains.
This is Panucci's. I used to work in this exact pizzeria.
And look, I don't like to just be the canon nitpicker, but these are basically just ideas we've seen executed within the show before in other contexts, and they were executed well. That's more of my issue than it is the continuity. We're just rehashing things we've seen and not quite doing it as well as the first time. So, I don't know. I think that's my bigger issue when I say they attempt to cram all of these references and reveals relating to the history of the show and how they feel a little bit shoehorned. But I do think the reveal that was at least interesting here was that the pepperoni they were using for their pizza at Pizza Bros was actually these old petrified fly traps from the 20th century, which is so gross. But again, at least it's an interesting and original gag. And you know, it wasn't like I hated this episode or anything. I think there's a lot of fun stuff in here. I just felt like it was rehashing a lot of things that the show had already done a bit better. But luckily, the next episode is not just one of my favorites of the season, but an episode that shocked me in how effectively it was able to pair a couple of characters that I never really expected to be paired, Zoidberg and Leela. I guess this is a bit of a theme now in the Hulu era, because one of my other favorite episodes, I Know What You Did Next Xmas, was also an unlikely Zoidberg pairing, that time with Bender. I know a lot of people have expressed disappointment in this new era that they sort of undid Zoidberg's happy ending from the end of the Comedy Central run by not bringing back his girlfriend Marianne, but I think the fact that they've managed to give us two top-tier Zoidberg episodes by maintaining the original dynamic means it was probably the right choice, particularly in this one, which gives us an incredibly sweet and heartwarming story. The episode actually starts at Kif and Amy's place when a meteor smashes into their downstairs neighbor's house. This directly leads to the two important focuses of the episode. One, determining where that meteor came from, and two, this family finding a new place to live, displacing Zoidberg. And as it turns out, the meteor was literally from Zoidberg's planet, Decapod 10, which brings us back there for the first time since the classic episode Why Must I Be a Crustacean in Love, and our first real focus on Decapodian culture since Taste of Freedom. And this was welcomed. I loved seeing not only the planet again, but getting to explore Decapodian natural history. That giant crab whale on the ceiling in the museum is so cool, and I love the designs of the Crabosaur skeletons. Those were great. Alien planet biology and evolution is always fun, but I also really appreciated how much I loved this new Decapodian character, Dr. Judith, who's designed to look like Farnsworth, leaving him enamored.
What are you doing later?
Sorry, you're not my type.
I had to give it a shot.
You actually didn't.
Futurama is a show with a ton of fun side characters, but it also feels like they've largely settled into relying on their large existing side cast. So when they introduce a new character that makes me laugh, I always take note. It seems like a good candidate for a return character if the chance arises. But this quick trip to Decapod leads to Dr. Judith explaining exactly how and why the meteor from Decapod reached Earth. The asteroid that killed the Crabosaurs also ejected tons of material from Decapod, hurling it into space, a few of which eventually reached Earth, including the one that hit Amy's condo. A cool little piece of Decapodian lore that we put a pin in for now. But the other result of this meteor is the family who lost their apartment takes over Zoidberg's dumpster, leaving him homeless. Now, maybe my one silly nitpick about this episode is that Kif and Amy pointedly live in a very expensive apartment since Amy is loaded, and so I didn't really understand why this family could live in such an upscale place and then have to downgrade to Zoidberg's dumpster. But again, this is a total nitpick, because the episode is then about Zoidberg trying to find a new place to live and nobody really wanting to put him up, which is a really classic feeling Zoidberg premise. Honestly, so classic, I'm surprised this wasn't something we saw in the Fox era. Zoidberg is pretty unambiguously the best person on the Planet Express crew, basically pretty selfless at every turn, and yet everyone sort of hates being around him. So of course, Fry tells Zoidberg he can stay with them despite Leela's protests. I actually really liked this detail too, because it's an example of a little bit of Fry and Leela conflict that's born from the new status quo of them living together, but it doesn't take a huge focus. It's just a good example of how using Fry and Leela as a couple can create for other kinds of dynamics and conflicts within other plots. And though Zoidberg is a good person, I definitely see why Leela or others might be fed up with living with him based on his behavior. But this leads to the real interpersonal conflict for the episode, and this was what worked so damn well for me. To get him out of the house, and also to pacify her parents' constant whining about her not visiting them enough, Leela pawns Zoidberg off on her parents, leading him to live with with Morris and Munda. I like this entire idea for a number of reasons. For one, I like the sort of realistic evolution of Leela's relationship with her parents. The entire first era of the show, she longed to find where she was from, and then obviously eventually got that answer in Leela's homeworld. And though they don't make a ton of appearances, she's gotten a whole array of parental experience with them since then. Trying to make time for them to visit the surface in Less Than Hero, actually living with them and getting the teenage experience when she reverted ages in Teenage Mutant Leela's Hurdles, even seeing them split up with her mom dating another man in Zap Dingbat before they eventually get back together. I like that though she loves her parents, she's somewhat realistically reached a place in her relationship with them where she is kind of taking them for granted. Parents can be a lot, and with Zoidberg being a generally lonely guy, one who doesn't get the love or support he's always craved nearly anywhere, finding a connection to parental figures like Morris and Munda was actually really heartwarming. Not to mention, I like any episode that really explores the sewer society. This Beach Boys montage showing Zoidberg and the Tarangas bond forming while Leela starts to feel jealousy and resentment was really great. I especially liked this submarine trip under the mutated lake. Some really cool monsters down there. But this story just all felt incredibly natural to me. It's born from development and traits we've known all of these characters to possess, and it feels like a supernatural way for their stories and dynamics to evolve.
When my species mates, they die. So I never met my parents.
Like I said, this one just has a really classic Futurama feeling. Even the decision for Morris and Munda to adopt Zoidberg, though maybe a bit extreme since he's a grown man, feels in character here for everybody. Like, I don't know how you can watch this and not have your heartstrings be tugged at for all three characters.
I came here with an empty suitcase, but I'm leaving with a suitcase full of love.
And even Leela's jealousy here, while not fully justified, is at least understandable. Obviously, she herself was taking her parents for granted, but I also fully get how upsetting it might be to feel like Zoidberg is getting the experience she never got as a child because of their decision to put her on the surface. I also think that Leela's acting out after Zoidberg becomes her adopted brother is pretty natural. She says some really unsavory things, but I like that a lot of Leela's friction with her parents feel like friction kids might have with parents when they're younger. She never got to have a childhood with them, and so they tend to make her reactions towards their conflict pretty childish in nature. An unexpected adoption into the family is definitely the kind of thing that would make a kid act out, and just as her jealousy and anger reach a boiling point, Leela gets sick. Turns out she needs a blenal gland transplant, something that only certain mutants have, and she'll need a tissue match from a relative, which leads to a relatively predictable but entirely satisfying reveal all the same. Somehow Zoidberg comes back as a match, despite not being related to Leela, and the explanation is, in my opinion, a classic example of Futurama perfectly intertwining its sci-fi concept with its emotional character-driven story. Dr. Judith reveals that one of the meteors created by the asteroid strike on Decapod 10 must have landed on ancient Earth, and the DNA on those meteors led to the evolution of many Earth species, including some of the DNA that eventually absorbed into the mutant lineage, making Zoidberg and Leela distantly related. I don't know, man, I just really loved this one. I think of all the episodes we got this season, this felt the most like it would have fit in the Fox era, despite the fact that it also features so many important status quo shifts from later eras. It's just a fun, funny, emotionally satisfying, and scientifically engaging episode across the board. Not to mention it ends with two great emotional beats. First, this great moment between Leela and Zoidberg.
I guess only a sibling can appreciate how annoying your parents are, and I'm happy to have that now.
Me too, sis.
I just thought this tied up so neatly, realizing that getting over her frustrations with Zoidberg gives her someone to commiserate with over parental frustrations. Then the episode ends with this lovely scene back in Zoidberg's dumpster after he moves back in, pinning up his new family photo. Man, again, I just loved this one. It intertwines so many years of character development and lore into such a nice, lovely package, and even throws in some new lore into the mix for satisfying sci-fi reveals. And it nails those emotional beats. This might be my favorite of the season, though there's one more that's neck and neck with it. We'll see when we get there. The 9th episode of the season was The Trouble with Truffles, of course named after the classic Star Trek episode The Trouble with Tribbles, and this one was interesting. I'm honestly not entirely sure where I land on it in the scheme of things. I feel like I'm closer to indifference than anything. The episode focuses on truffle hunting. After Bender learns how expensive truffles are, he heads out to hunt them himself, and it co-stars this tiny little yapping pig that he names Jambone. And the pig Big is admittedly very, very cute, but I really just wasn't all that engaged by the character or the truffle hunting adventure itself. The episode does have a decent amount of the robot mafia in it, who, as it turns out, is also the truffle cartel, which also I think is just a funny concept, the truffle cartel. And anytime the robot mafia is involved, you're gonna get some laughs. They're just always funny. I think the thing about this episode that really stood out to me as pretty exceptional were some of these location and background designs, especially on this super lush asteroid where they end up finding all of these truffles. The idea that the entire thing is basically encased in a giant outer canopy layer of trees is really cool, and the design of the interior of that canopy really did not disappoint. I just absolutely loved the look of this thing. Not to mention all of these skeletal corpses they come across, just really cool designs. I also loved the design of this like leafy dragon thing. It's awesome conceptually and executionally. I wish we had gotten a little bit more of it, but the ending of this thing kind of left me feeling a little bleh about it all. I think the idea of the Glutton Awards is very funny, and obviously gives us an opportunity for a hedonism bot cameo, which is always welcomed by me, but I just didn't love this resolution for Jambone, who got so addicted to the truffle that he became the most successful glutton of all. Definitely an attempt at a nice and sweet resolution, but I don't think it quite landed. This happy ending for Jambone felt a bit disconnected from the rest of the story, and I wasn't sure it aligned with Jambone's admittedly limited motivations. I definitely had some laughs, and I appreciated certain things about this one, but I left feeling relatively indifferent. But luckily, this leads us to the season finale, The White Hole, which once again just feels like a classic that will really stand the test of time. For me, this is just an iconic example of Futurama absolutely nailing a sci-fi story. Now, a white hole is a concept found in theoretical astrophysics. In layman's terms, it's the opposite of a black hole.
Instead of sucking everything in, it blasts everything out. Energy, matter, time, the big three.
Side note, I love the little detail in this scene that Fry's arm is just around Leela as they sit on the couch. They're cute, alright? But the white hole starts literally demanding attention from the entire universe, only to reveal that the white hole itself is a portal and that they're extending an invite.
That you may join the other 12 or so universes in bearing witness to the greatest event that can be witnessed.
Okay, I think this lore drop that there are only 12 or so other universes is very funny, and I do wonder if it clashes with the cowboy universe we saw in I Dated a Robot, or the parallel universes from the Farnsworth Parabox. Honestly, it might be a fun deep dive for its own video, but the white hole reveals that select representatives from this universe can go see the birth of a new universe. A pretty cool idea. Even though we know Farnsworth, Fry, and Bender have all already seen the Big Bang twice, Farnsworth even got a third time in there, but I guess we can presume that the birth of a new universe is different than the Big Bang, so still kind of a cool idea. I really love the sci-fi premise here. Basically, the idea is that because the white hole is pushing out chronotons, anyone who approaches it will age rapidly. So a small amount of Earth time equates to a massive amount of time for those approaching the white hole. Kind of like that sequence in Interstellar where every minute on that one planet equated to 7 Earth days because of the black hole's time dilation in that instance. So in this, the initial crew of children they send can't get anywhere near the white hole before rapidly reaching old age. It's a great sci-fi conundrum, and the resolution is really fun. Basically, the Planet Express crew freezes themselves in carbonara to prevent aging while the ship travels the millions of years to the white hole. But so that they can actually resolve any issues on the ship, they use this machine to create living replicants of every crew member to address those issues as they arrive, which is pretty messed up. Honestly, this entire premise is messed up. There's this shot of everyone's families watching the crew go off into the white hole, concerned they might never see them again, and they just sort of never address that very real fact about the episode's basic premise. But the idea here is that when a replicant is created, it has a limited amount of time to resolve the problem before they rapidly age and turn to dust. But they really undersell how messed up this is.
You have all of Scruffy's skills, all his passions and desires.
I mean, imagine waking up, having all of your regular memories from your entire life, thinking it's just another day, and then being told, oh, you're actually just a copy. You have about 10 minutes until you turn to bones. They're basically just creating time-limited slave copies of themselves to perform menial tasks. Real severance coded. But it does make for some funny wastes of entire replicant lifetimes. Scruffy fixes the water leak, and then Fry is replicated just because Scruffy left the light on. At one point, 3 new Scruffies are made to sweep up the bones of previous Scruffies. Another Fry is made just to make Hermes a man-witch. I know it also doesn't really make sense for Bender to age, considering we know that he has survived so many thousands of years and remained fully intact over the course of the show. 1,000 years from the end of Roswell That Ends Well, and then probably so many thousands more from Bender's big score. But the visualization of this Bender getting old really did it for me. That long, rusty beard is so cool. They did a great job making him actually look decrepit. His first task being to separate the rocket from the rest of the Planet Express ship so that they can continue their trip to the White Hole. I feel like they just did a great job taking this concept to a real variety of cool and creative different places. They have to fend off these awesome gelatinous fish things that try to feed on the ship. A chronoton leak ages just one side of Leela and Fry's faces, but the yogurt monster is probably my favorite sequence. One of the Frys leaves out a half-eaten yogurt that gets hit with the leaking chronotons, evolving into this yogurt monster that consumes the replicants. Just a little extra cosmic horror thrown on top of the already existing cosmic horror. Though the yogurt monster wasn't nearly as cosmically horrific as the thing that finished him off. 3 massive Zoidberg replicants, including one with a half-completed head that gets a full-on alien's face-off with Leela. Really fun stuff. But I think the resolution to this episode is what makes it great. Granted, it wasn't a resolution I was super surprised by, but it was absolutely the correct choice for the story. Upon being replicated, just so that they can wake up the original members of the crew, the final replicants decide to instead use their limited existence to take the place of the original crew members in seeing the birth of the new universe. And why wouldn't they? Though it doesn't necessarily address these questions in a super philosophical way, I think tackling the is a replicant its own person conundrum from a more hands-on perspective played out in a really satisfying way here. We didn't need to ruminate on the moral quandary because everything that played out was funny, and in the end, the final replicants just took their fate into their own hands. Also, I just loved the visualization of the energy as the replicants went through the portal. This is such a beautiful shot, and a funny ending that they basically failed the mission because they didn't actually experience the birth of the new universe.
We have no idea what happened because we never even woke up. Shut up and take your medals.
Honestly, I think if there's one thing I can say that the Hulu era is actually doing better than any other era, it's impactful season finales. All the Way Down, Otherwise, and The White Hole are not only 3 of my top episodes in this most recent revival, but they all just feel like big, well-executed sci-fi concepts. There is weight to the stories being told. They feel like bigger ideas than a lot of other episodes. Obviously, the Fox era was broadcast out of production order, so the staff didn't have any real say into which episodes would serve as season finales, except for Devil's Hands or Idle Playthings, of course. But even the episodes that were listed as finales in production order were just kind of run-of-the-mill. Fry and the Slurm Factory, The Cryonic Woman, and the 30% Iron Chef are all just kind of standard Futurama episodes. You might even be able to argue that the finales in the broadcast order were stronger, with Hell is Other Robots, Anthology of Interest 1, and Where No Fan Has Gone Before, all feeling like pretty strong season enders. The Comedy Central era had great finales every other season, with Reincarnation and Meanwhile, but the others were kind of dud finales, ending with the more poorly received anthology stories, Futurama Holiday Spectacular and Naturama. So, you know, there is something that this new era is unequivocally succeeding at, in my opinion. Honestly, while I still don't think the Hulu era of Futurama has quite worked out all of its kinks, through a rewatch and writing this video, I really appreciated the places they took this season. While there were still a few missteps that I wasn't overly fond of, and a few episodes felt slightly unsatisfying in their resolutions, there are some great concepts, some very funny moments, and 3 episodes that I grew to love even more as I wrote about them. The Numberland Gap, Crab Splatter, and The White Hole are easily among the best in the Hulu era, and I think rank up there with some of the stronger episodes in the entire series. Maybe not quite as strong as the impeccable All the Way Down, but really great stuff. I think it also helped that they opted to forgo the anthology episode this year, which just never seemed to hit for the fan base like they'd hoped, outside of the first 2 Anthology of Interests and Reincarnation. But it has me pretty excited that they may be hitting a real stride going into the next 10, which as of the time of recording this, are the final 10 that Hulu has contracted from the Futurama staff. Though it does seem like they've been happy with Futurama's performance, and with the huge success of the King of the Hill revival, it feels like they might want to stay in the business of adult animation, though Hulu is also fully merging with Disney Plus soon, so I don't know how that might affect things. Hopefully they maintain their adult animation hub status. But as of writing this, the expectation is that next year might be the final 10 episodes of Futurama again, and I do think there is a lot to look forward to. In my interview with David X. Cohen, he hinted that we'll get a new episode with a major focus on the Neblonians. A couple things that some of the actors told me in their interviews, as well as episode 9 being credited to Matt Groening and Josh Weinstein, leads me to believe that it's almost certainly going to be a Disenchantment crossover episode. And maybe most excitingly, Cohen has also said in other interviews that the finale, which is once again being written as a potential series finale, will be another that explores Fry's history/childhood in the past. Obviously being the next in a lineup that features Luck of the Fryrish, Jurassic Bark, Cold Warriors, Game of Tones, and last season's Quids Game. But what makes this one pretty exciting to me is the fact that it's being delivered as a potential series finale. As I'm sure a lot of you know, next season will be Futurama's 6th ever episode written as though it might be the final episode, which is basically tradition at this point. At the end of an episode order, they always write a potential last episode just in case they're not renewed. They've done this with Devil's Hands Are Idle Playthings, Into the Wild Green Yonder, Overclockwise, Meanwhile, and last season's Otherwise. Now, the thing is that most of these have put a real focus on Fry and Leela in their finale, especially Devil's Hands and Meanwhile. And it's obviously very possible that this flashback episode still does that. It's basically tradition at this point, but I really love the idea of looking backwards at Fry's past in order to appreciate the journey he has taken in the future. Fry's family has always been this sort of underlying tragedy beneath the surface of the series premise. Even though Fry felt like he didn't fit in and more or less flourished in the future, these flashback episodes all revealed that his disappearance really did leave a hole in his family's lives in one way or another. I'm really curious to see exactly how this one will approach Fry's past, whether it will be a flashback episode or a time travel episode, and regardless, I think it's a fresh angle for a series finale that could really lend to some super emotional, gut-punchy final moments. I presume that by the time it airs, we will know whether or not we're getting more episodes, but as of now, we just don't. So on the slate, as it sits, it is the final episode of Futurama. And that is all I've got for you guys. I'm sorry that this wasn't quite as in-depth as my coverage the last 2 years, but I obviously wanted to talk about the season still, and I definitely want to know what you guys all think about these 10 episodes. Also, if you have any interest in those interviews I did with the cast and crew of Futurama, there's a couple videos on my Johnny 2 Casual channel that sort of group the most interesting responses into themed videos, and then they're also available uncut on my Patreon as well. I'm also considering some new Futurama deep dives next year, so we'll see how that goes. Stay tuned for more. Peace.
I stay mellow watching Johnny 2 Cellos. He talks cartoons, he's a really cool fellow. He keeps you posted on adult cartoons. If that's what you're into, then grab a spoon and a very big bowl of your favorite cereal. Feels like Saturday morning cartoon material. Johnny 2 Cellos, watch him on YouTube. Now enjoy this groove and bust a move.